Subscribe to this channel right now, because what you're about to hear is not trivia, nostalgia, or surface-level history. This is the kind of forgotten, practical knowledge that once kept entire communities alive when supply lines collapsed, governments failed, and hunger became routine. During the darkest years of World War II, there was one plant that quietly carried villages through famine, occupation, and siege. It required no fertilizer, ignored poor soil, survived frost, and produced calories when wheat, potatoes, and livestock were gone. And yet, today, most people have never planted it, never cooked it, and barely remember its name. That plant was the Jerusalem artichoke, also known as the sunchoke. And its disappearance from mainstream agriculture tells us a lot about how modern food systems traded resilience for convenience. So, the Jerusalem artichoke is not an artichoke at all, you know. It's actually a sunflower relative with underground tubers that look a bit like knotted ginger. Before the war, it was already known across Europe, but it really became essential during wartime because, well, it thrived when everything else failed. In occupied France, rural Germany, parts of Eastern Europe, and even here in Britain, families relied on it when ration cards ran thin and fields were, requisitioned. It grew where potatoes succumbed to disease, where grain fields were bombed or burned, and where labour shortages made high-maintenance crops just impossible. What made it extraordinary, honestly, was its refusal to die. Jerusalem artichokes tolerate frost, drought, and poor soil. You could plant them once and, harvest them for years. During the Second World War, villagers would often hide tubers in hedgerows, at the edges of forests, and in abandoned plots. It was a quiet act of survival, really. See, the occupying forces were mostly focused on wheat cattle and all the visible crops. Jerusalem artichokes, though, they stayed underground, ignored, and just quietly multiplying. Entire households, they survived winters on them alone, boiled, roasted, mashed, or even fermented. Nutritionally, the plant was misunderstood back then, and honestly still is now. Jerusalem artichokes are packed with inulin, which is a complex carbohydrate that doesn't spike blood sugar like starch does. This made them sustaining, without the crashes you get from refined grains. They also provided iron, potassium, and calories dense enough to replace bread when flour disappeared. For people doing hard physical labour under starvation conditions, that mattered. So why did we stop growing a crop that proved itself under total societal stress? The first reason is taste memory. During the war, Jerusalem artichokes became associated with hunger, occupation, and desperation. In post-war Europe, people wanted nothing that reminded them of empty cupboards and survival meals. So, potatoes returned, white bread returned, meat returned as well. The sunchoke was quietly abandoned, not because it failed, but because, it succeeded during a time people wanted to forget. The second reason, really, is industrial agriculture. Jerusalem artichokes just don't behave well in monoculture systems designed for mechanized harvesting. Their tubers grow irregularly at all sorts of varying depths. They don't fit cleanly into standardized processing lines. Modern farming, you see, favours crops that can be planted, sprayed, harvested and shipped with as little variation as possible. Resilience was no longer the priority. Uniformity was. The third reason is, well, shelf life and transport. Jerusalem artichokes, you see, store best right there in the ground. Once they're harvested, they dry out faster than potatoes, which makes them, honestly, a bit inconvenient for long-distance distribution. But, you know, that's exactly what makes them perfect for local decentralized food systems. Back during the Second World War, villages ate what grew nearby. These days, though, modern supply chains demand crops that can survive for weeks in transit and storage. Here's where this really matters today, especially for survivalists and, well, serious historians. Jerusalem artichokes actually represent a different philosophy of food security. Instead of chasing high yield per acre under perfect conditions, they offer guaranteed calories, even when things go bad. They don't need annual replanting. They don't require fertilizer. They don't attract the same pests as grains. In a disrupted environment that is, well, priceless. If you were to apply this knowledge practically, the steps are straightforward. Plant tubers in early spring or late fall in marginal land you're not using. Do not overthink spacing. They will spread. Let them grow tall, sometimes over 3 meters, forming natural windbreaks. Harvest only what you need when you need it, even in winter. Leave the rest underground as living storage. This is exactly how World War II villagers used them. Cooking them is equally simple. Boiling reduces their sweetness and makes them more digestible. Roasting concentrates calories. Fermentation turns them into a gut-friendly staple that stores longer. During the war, families mixed them with barley or wild greens when available, stretching meals without sacrificing energy. The deeper lesson here is uncomfortable. We didn't stop growing Jerusalem artichokes because they failed. We stopped because our systems stopped valuing crops that function without infrastructure. WWII forced people to rediscover plants that don't care if trucks stop running or fertilizers vanish. When the crisis ended, that knowledge was pushed aside. For historians, this plant is evidence of civilian resilience rarely discussed in official war narratives. For survivalists, it's a reminder that real food security comes from plants that survive neglect, not perfection. And for anyone serious about preparedness, it's a crop that deserves a place in the ground again. If this kind of lost, practical history matters to you, subscribe to the channel. Share this with someone who still believes food security comes from supermarkets alone, and stay here. This channel exists to preserve the knowledge that once kept people alive when nothing else did.